The wedding invitation slipped from his fingers and landed silently on the polished marble floor. For the first time in years, the man feared by politicians, billionaires, and rival syndicates couldn't bring himself to pick up a single piece of paper. His eyes remained fixed on the elegant gold letters. You are warmly invited to celebrate the marriage of Nala Adebayo, the same woman who had prepared every meal he had eaten for 7 years. The same woman who always waited until he returned home before turning off the kitchen lights. The same woman whose gentle smile had quietly become the only peaceful part of his dangerous life. Everyone congratulated her. Everyone believed she had finally found happiness. But no one knew the heartbreaking truth. For years, Nala had turned down every man who asked for her hand, not because she hated love, but because her heart had belonged to one man since they were teenagers. She simply believed someone as feared and powerful as him could never belong to someone as ordinary as her. And now, just days before her wedding, the Korean Mafia boss was about to discover that the warmth filling his mansion every single day wasn't just kindness. It had always been love. But would he realize it before another man called her his wife? Stay with me, because this story isn't about power or wealth. It's about two people who loved each other in silence until time threatened to separate them forever. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to Official_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. The city of Seoul looked breathtaking at sunrise. Towering buildings reflected golden light, while expensive cars glided through quiet streets. Hidden behind that beautiful skyline was another world, one ruled not by laws but by influence, loyalty, and whispered names that made powerful people nervous. Among those names, none carried more weight than Kang Min-jae. To the public, he was the brilliant CEO of one of South Korea's fastest-growing investment companies. Newspapers praised his intelligence, business instincts, and mysterious personality. Television hosts admired his discipline and calm leadership. But behind closed doors, everyone who truly mattered knew another version of him. He controlled an organization so influential that politicians consulted him before making certain decisions. Business rivals preferred losing money over making him an enemy. Even people who had never met him lowered their voices whenever they mentioned his name. Yet despite possessing unimaginable wealth and power, Min-jae lived a strangely lonely life. His mansion overlooked the Han River, surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens, expensive sculptures, and layers of security. Every room was decorated with elegance, yet none of them felt lived in. Employees respected him. Visitors admired him. No one truly knew him. His mornings always began the same way. At exactly 6:30, he walked downstairs wearing a perfectly tailored suit before leaving for work. And every morning without fail, breakfast was already waiting. Not because he had asked, because someone simply knew what he needed. That someone was Nala. Unlike the other employees, Nala never rushed through her work or tried to impress anyone. She moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, humming softly while preparing meals that somehow reflected exactly how Min-jae was feeling, even when he said nothing at all. If he had slept poorly, breakfast became lighter. If he returned exhausted after endless meetings, dinner carried comforting flavors from recipes she had spent years perfecting. No one understood how she always knew. Least of all Min-jae. He assumed she was simply exceptionally observant. What he didn't know was that no one studies another person's habits the way someone in love does. 7 years earlier, Nala had arrived in Seoul carrying only one suitcase and an old recommendation letter from a retired chef who had once worked for Min-jae's late grandfather. She wasn't from a wealthy family. She had no influential connections. She simply possessed extraordinary talent in the kitchen and an even more extraordinary ability to care for people without asking for anything in return. Many questioned why someone so young had been hired to cook inside the residence of one of Korea's most powerful men. They didn't know there was another reason she had accepted the position so quickly. Years before either of them imagined crossing paths again, two teenagers had shared a brief encounter that neither truly forgot. Nala had been 16, studying at an international culinary exchange program held in Busan. One rainy afternoon, she found a quiet Korean boy sitting alone behind the school auditorium, hiding bruises beneath his sleeves. Other students ignored him. Some feared him. Rumors surrounded his family. Instead of asking questions, she simply handed him a warm bowl of seaweed soup she had prepared during class. "You look like someone who forgot what home tastes like," she had said with a smile. The boy looked at her for several seconds before quietly accepting the bowl. It was the first meal anyone had offered him without expecting something in return. Neither exchanged last names. Neither imagined their paths would separate just days later. But before leaving Busan, the boy had thanked her with words she never forgot. One day, I'll repay your kindness. Life carried them in different directions. Nala pursued culinary training across Asia and Africa, determined to become a chef capable of comforting people through food. The quiet Korean teenager disappeared into a world of responsibility far heavier than either of them could have imagined. Years later, when she saw Kang Min-jae's face in a business magazine, recognition struck instantly. Those same thoughtful eyes, the same calm expression. Only now they carried loneliness far deeper than before. She never contacted him. She simply smiled to herself and whispered, "I'm glad you're alive." Then fate surprised her again. When the retired chef recommended her for the mansion's vacant position, she accepted without hesitation. Min-jae never recognized her. After all, 7 years had transformed the cheerful teenage girl into a graceful young woman whose confidence now hid behind quiet professionalism. She didn't remind him. She didn't expect gratitude. Watching him from a respectful distance felt enough. Days became months. Months became years. The mansion slowly changed in ways few noticed. Employees smiled more often because Nala always remembered birthdays. The elderly gardener received hot tea during winter without asking. Drivers found homemade lunches waiting before long trips. Security guards returning from overnight shifts discovered warm bread cooling on the kitchen counter. She treated everyone with the same kindness she had once shown a lonely teenage boy. Eventually, even Min-jae began lingering near the kitchen more often than necessary. He never admitted why. Sometimes he claimed he wanted coffee. Other times he asked unusual questions. "Why does soup taste different today?" She smiled gently. "Because you skipped lunch." His eyebrows lifted. "You noticed? You usually finish lunch before 1. Today your assistant brought the tray back, almost untouched." He gave a slight nod before quietly eating every spoonful. He never asked how she knew. He simply found himself trusting her observations. As seasons passed, an unspoken rhythm formed between them. She never crossed professional boundaries. He never allowed personal conversations. Yet silence somehow became their language. Whenever business meetings left him emotionally drained, she somehow prepared exactly the meal he needed. Whenever she looked tired after spending hours experimenting with recipes, fresh flowers mysteriously appeared in the kitchen the following morning. Neither acknowledged who had sent them. Neither needed to. Meanwhile, the mansion staff had begun noticing something unusual. Marriage proposals arrived for Nala more often than anyone expected. A successful architect, a respected university professor, even the son of a famous hotel owner. Each man admired her warmth, intelligence, and gentle nature. Each proposal received the same graceful response. "I'm honored, but my heart already belongs somewhere." She never revealed where. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed she had someone waiting overseas. Others assumed she simply loved her independence too much. Only Nala knew the truth. Every rejection quietly protected the impossible dream she had carried since she was 16. She had fallen in love with a boy before the world turned him into a man everyone feared. But what she didn't realize was that someone new had just walked into her life. And unlike the others, he wasn't planning to give up after hearing no. That unexpected meeting would begin changing not only Nala's future, but also the heart of the man who had never realized that the home he cherished had been built not from marble or wealth, but from one woman's quiet, unwavering love. The following Monday arrived like every other morning inside Kang Min-jae's mansion. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, warm herbal tea, and sizzling vegetables. The staff moved quietly through the hallways, careful not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere Nala had somehow created over the years. She greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. Nothing about her expression suggested that another marriage proposal had been placed before her only 3 days earlier. She had politely declined it, just as she always did. To everyone else, it was simply another chapter in a familiar story. To Min-jae, it was information he barely acknowledged. Marriage was something he had long convinced himself had no place in his life. Love, in his experience, only created weaknesses. Weaknesses became vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities destroyed powerful men. At least, that was what he had always believed. But life has a strange way of challenging the beliefs we hold most tightly. That same afternoon, The mansion's head butler informed Nala that a special guest would be joining Min Jae for dinner. "I'll prepare something memorable," she replied with her usual calmness. The guest arrived shortly before sunset. His name was Daniel Park. He was a Korean entrepreneur who had spent many years abroad managing luxury hotels across Europe and Singapore before recently returning to Seoul. Unlike many wealthy businessmen, Daniel carried himself with warmth instead of pride. He laughed easily. He thanked every employee personally. Even before dinner began, the staff found themselves liking him. As Nala served the first course, Daniel looked up with genuine surprise after taking his first bite. "This is extraordinary." Nala smiled politely. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." "No," Daniel said softly, setting down his spoon. "I don't think you understand. I've dined in Michelin-star restaurants across Europe, but this tastes different." She tilted her head slightly. "In what way?" "It tastes like someone genuinely wanted the person eating it to have a better day." For a brief moment, silence filled the dining room. Min Jae glanced toward Nala. She simply bowed slightly before returning to the kitchen. But something about Daniel's words lingered in his mind. After dinner, Daniel asked the butler a question that surprised everyone. "May I personally thank the chef?" The butler hesitated before looking toward Min Jae. Visitors rarely entered the kitchen. To everyone's surprise, Min Jae nodded. Daniel walked into the kitchen and found Nala carefully organizing fresh ingredients for the next morning. "I hope I'm not interrupting." She turned with a smile. "Not at all. I just wanted to thank you." "You already did." "I don't think I thank you enough." She laughed softly. "Then thank me by coming back hungry next time." For reasons neither of them understood, conversation flowed naturally. They spoke about food, travel, different cultures, their favorite childhood memories involving family recipes. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking Nala about work. They were asking about her. When Daniel finally left, he carried a brighter smile than when he had arrived. Min Jae noticed. He told himself it meant nothing. Yet later that evening, while reviewing business reports inside his office, he realized he had read the same page for different times. His thoughts kept drifting toward the kitchen, toward laughter, toward someone else's voice mixing so naturally with hers. He closed the file, annoyed with himself. Meanwhile, weeks passed, and Daniel began finding small reasons to visit the mansion. Sometimes he discussed business investments with Min Jae. Other times he delivered imported ingredients he thought Nala might enjoy experimenting with. Every visit ended the same way. He spent a few extra minutes talking with her before leaving. Their conversations remained respectful, simple, comfortable. The staff noticed first. "Chef Nala laughs more these days. I've never seen her talk this much. They seem happy." The words somehow found their way to Min Jae's ears. He ignored them, or at least he tried. One rainy evening, Min Jae returned home much later than expected. A difficult negotiation had consumed his entire day. He walked into the dining room expecting an empty table. Instead, he found Nala quietly waiting beside a covered meal. "You haven't gone home? I thought you might still be hungry." "You waited?" She nodded. "The soup would have lost its flavor if I left it sitting too long." He looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "You should have gone home." "I didn't mind." She uncovered the bowl. Steam rose gently into the air. Min Jae took the first spoonful. The exhaustion weighing on his shoulders seemed to disappear. He looked at her. "You always know." She smiled. "I've simply had 7 years to learn." Those words echoed inside him long after she had gone home. 7 years. He had never stopped to think how much of her life she had quietly spent taking care of him. The following weekend, Daniel invited Nala to a charity food festival where chefs from different countries prepared meals for orphaned children. At first she declined. She didn't want to overstep professional boundaries. But Min Jae surprised everyone. "You should go." She looked at him. "The children will benefit from your cooking." She smiled warmly. "Thank you." The festival became one of the happiest days Nala had experienced in years. Children surrounded her, laughing as she taught them simple recipes. Daniel worked beside her the entire afternoon, washing vegetables, carrying supplies, and encouraging shy children to participate. There were no expensive suits, no business meetings, no titles, just genuine happiness. A photographer captured dozens of candid moments. Nala smiling while decorating cupcakes with children. Daniel helping a little girl stir soup. The two of them laughing after flour accidentally covered both their aprons. 2 days later, those photographs appeared in a local lifestyle magazine celebrating community volunteers. The magazine found its way onto Min Jae's office desk. He stared at one photograph longer than he intended. Nala smiled. It looked different. Lighter. Freer. He couldn't remember the last time she had smiled that way inside his mansion. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened. That evening he walked into the kitchen. She was preparing dumplings. You enjoyed the festival? She looked pleasantly surprised. I did. The children seemed to enjoy themselves. They reminded me that happiness doesn't have to be complicated. He watched her carefully folding each dumpling. You smiled a lot. She laughed. Was it that obvious? He nodded. I don't see that smile here. The room suddenly became quiet. Nala looked at him with gentle eyes. That's because this place isn't where I come to be happy. His heart sank before she finished her sentence. It's where I come to make sure someone else is. She lowered her gaze and continued working. She had spoken honestly without realizing the impact of her words. Min Jae stood there unable to respond. For the first time, he wondered whether he had spent years accepting her kindness without ever asking what she needed in return. Days later, another surprise arrived. Daniel visited the mansion carrying a small box wrapped in blue ribbon. It's for Chef Nala. Inside was a handcrafted chef's knife engraved with delicate cherry blossoms. I noticed your old knife has become worn. Nala looked genuinely touched. You remembered? You deserve tools worthy of your talent. She carefully held the gift. It means a great deal to me. Min Jae watched the exchange from the hallway. He had purchased countless expensive gifts for business associates over the years. Luxury watches, sports cars, rare artwork. Yet he couldn't remember the last time he had given Nala anything with genuine thought behind it. Not because he didn't appreciate her, because somewhere along the way, he had started believing she would always be there. Like sunrise, like the seasons, like home. But home only remains if someone chooses to stay. That realization unsettled him more than any business crisis ever had. A few evenings later, the mansion hosted a small celebration for one of the senior employees retiring after 30 years of service. Music filled the gardens. Everyone laughed together. As the celebration continued, Daniel quietly approached Nala beneath the glowing lanterns. I've been meaning to ask you something. She looked at him curiously. What is it? He smiled. Would you have dinner with me? Not as a thank you. He paused before continuing. But as someone who would genuinely like to know you better. Nala remained silent. Not because she disliked him, but because another face quietly appeared in her heart. The face she had spent years trying to forget. Meanwhile, standing several steps away, unnoticed beneath the garden lights, Kong Min Jae heard every single word. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he discovered what jealousy truly felt like. The feeling frightened him far more than any enemy ever had. Because deep inside, a question he had avoided for years could no longer be ignored. If Nala accepted another man's invitation, why did it suddenly feel as though he was the one about to lose everything? Kong Min Jae stood motionless beneath the glowing lanterns, the cheerful voices around him fading into distant echoes. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without flinching. He had stared down men twice his age who tried to intimidate him. He had spent years mastering every emotion that threatened to cloud his judgment. Yet one simple question from another man had shaken him more than anything he had ever faced. Would you have dinner with me? The words repeated endlessly in his mind. For several long seconds, she didn't answer. Daniel noticed her hesitation and smiled kindly. You don't have to answer tonight. She looked toward the mansion. I respect that, Daniel replied warmly. And I'll respect whatever answer you give me. He bowed politely before stepping away to greet another guest. Nala remained standing beneath the lanterns. She released a quiet breath, unaware that Min Jae had heard every word. But something inside him had already begun to change. That night, sleep refused to come. Min Jae sat alone in his study, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul. For years, silence had been his closest companion. Tonight it felt unbearably loud. His eyes drifted toward the kitchen wing of the mansion. The lights had already gone out. Nala had gone home. For the first time in 7 years, the mansion felt strangely empty. He tried reading reports. He answered emails. He even poured himself coffee at 2 in the morning. Nothing distracted him. Instead, memories he had never paid attention to began surfacing one after another. The rainy evenings when she quietly waited for him to come home before serving dinner. The mornings she noticed he hadn't slept well without him saying a word. He didn't pressure Nala for an answer. Instead, he continued treating her exactly as he always had, with patience, kindness, and sincere respect. Sometimes he stopped by the mansion simply to bring rare ingredients from overseas. Sometimes he invited her to charity cooking events. Sometimes they spent an hour discussing recipes over tea. Never once did he try to rush her heart. That quiet patience made Nala admire him. Not because she loved him, but because he never demanded anything she wasn't ready to give. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, while organizing old storage rooms inside the mansion, the elderly housekeeper discovered several dusty boxes belonging to Min Jae's late grandfather. Among old photographs, journals, and family keepsakes rested a small wooden box tied with faded blue ribbon. "Young master," she called, "I think these belong to your grandfather." Min Jae opened the box absent-mindedly. Inside lay several personal belongings from his teenage years. A school notebook, an old train ticket, a faded friendship bracelet. Then, his fingers stopped. Folded carefully beneath everything else was a worn photograph. The picture showed a teenage boy sitting awkwardly on a wooden bench, holding a bowl of seaweed soup. Beside him stood a smiling African girl wearing a culinary school apron. Time seemed to freeze. His breathing slowed. His eyes widened. He remembered. The rain. The loneliness. The warm soup. The girl who had looked at him without fear. The girl who had smiled as though he wasn't the son of a feared family. He whispered almost silently, "Nala." Every forgotten memory returned at once. She wasn't just his chef. She was the first person who had ever shown him kindness without expecting anything back. How had he never recognized her? The answer hurt more than he expected, because he had spent years burying that part of his life beneath responsibility, grief, and power. Meanwhile, Nala was finishing preparations for dinner when Min Jae walked into the kitchen carrying the faded photograph. She looked up, then froze. The bowl slipped slightly in her hands. Her eyes filled with quiet surprise. "You remembered." His voice trembled ever so slightly. "It was you." She looked down at the old photograph before smiling softly. "I wondered if you ever would." "You knew? I recognized you the day I arrived. And you never told me?" She gently shook her head. "You were carrying so much already. You should have said something." What would it have changed? He couldn't answer. Because she was right. Years ago, he probably wouldn't have understood what that meeting had truly meant. She looked at the photograph again. "I never helped you because I expected you to remember. I helped because I wanted that lonely boy to know someone cared." Silence filled the kitchen. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Min Jae looked at her differently now. Not as an employee. Not as the chef who kept his mansion running. But as someone who had quietly remained part of his life long before either of them realized destiny had brought them together again. That evening he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every hallway reminded him of her footsteps. Every meal reminded him of her patience. Every quiet corner reminded him of the home she had built around him without ever asking for recognition. A few days later, the annual charity gala hosted by Min Jae's company brought together influential business leaders, artists, and philanthropists. For the first time, Min Jae personally invited Nala to attend. "You've spent years making everyone else feel appreciated." He looked into her eyes. "I think it's time someone appreciated you." She hesitated. "I don't belong at events like this." "You belong wherever you're respected." His words stayed with her. That evening, when Nala entered the ballroom wearing a simple but elegant emerald green dress, conversations around the room gradually slowed. She wasn't dressed like someone seeking attention. She simply carried herself with quiet grace. Min Jae looked at her for several seconds. For the first time, he saw not the woman who worked in his kitchen. He saw the woman everyone else had been seeing all along. Beautiful, kind, confident, extraordinary. Daniel approached with a warm smile. "You look amazing." "Thank you." They spent part of the evening talking with guests. Min Jae watched from across the ballroom. Every smile she shared with Daniel stirred something unfamiliar inside him. Not anger. Regret. Because he suddenly realized how many opportunities he had wasted. 7 years of quiet breakfasts. 7 years of waiting dinners. 7 years of conversations that could have become something more if only he had opened his heart. Later that night, Daniel asked if they could step into the garden. Under blooming cherry trees illuminated by soft lights, he looked at Nala with gentle sincerity. "I've thought about this carefully." She listened quietly. "I know your heart has carried someone for a long time." Her eyes widened. "You knew?" "I noticed." He smiled kindly. "You always looked at someone the way people look toward home." A tear formed in her eye. I tried to stop. "I know." He reached into his jacket pocket. Instead of a ring, he handed her a handwritten letter. If one day your heart becomes free. He smiled warmly. I'd still like the chance to be the man who makes you smile. Nala accepted the letter with trembling hands. At that exact moment, standing just beyond the garden entrance, Min Jae saw the letter change hands. His heart tightened. He didn't know what was written inside. He only knew one terrifying thought. Someone else was finally brave enough to ask for the future he had never realized he wanted. And this time, if he stayed silent again, he might lose the woman who had quietly loved him through every lonely season of his life. Little did he know, the answer waiting inside Nala's heart would force him to make the most important decision he had ever faced. Not as a feared mafia boss, not as a billionaire, but simply as the lonely boy who had finally remembered the girl who once handed him a bowl of warm soup in the rain. Min Jae stood beneath the entrance of the garden long after Daniel and Nala had gone their separate ways. The cool night breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms through the quiet courtyard, but he barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the folded letter in Nala's hands. For years, he had convinced himself that controlling his emotions made him stronger. Now he understood the truth. Suppressing them had only made him blind. He returned home that night, but the mansion no longer felt familiar. The polished marble floors, the expensive artwork, the grand staircase, everything looked exactly as it always had. Yet something was missing. Or perhaps, someone had always been the reason it felt like home. The next morning, Nala arrived before sunrise as she always did. She tied her apron, organized fresh ingredients, and quietly prepared breakfast. Nothing about her routine had changed. But Min Jae had. Instead of heading straight to the dining room, he walked into the kitchen. The staff exchanged surprised glances before politely excusing themselves, leaving the two of them alone. Nala looked up with a gentle smile. Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes. I'm not here for breakfast. She paused. There was something different in his voice. Not authority. Not distance. Just honesty. He slowly placed the faded photograph they had found a few days earlier on the kitchen counter. I kept thinking about that day in Busan. She looked down at the picture, her fingers lightly brushing its worn edges. It feels like another lifetime. It was the first time anyone had ever cared whether I had eaten. She looked at him quietly. You looked lonely. I was. His eyes lowered. My parents had already passed away. My grandfather was raising me while trying to protect our family. Everyone treated me like someone dangerous before I even understood why. He smiled sadly. But you just handed me soup. You looked hungry. No. He shook his head gently. I was hungry, but not for food. Silence settled between them. For years, neither of them had spoken about that rainy afternoon. Now every unspoken emotion seemed to find its voice. You gave me something I couldn't find anywhere else. She looked into his eyes. What was that? Peace. A tear slowly formed in Nala's eyes. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The kitchen staff returned, forcing the conversation to end. But neither of them walked away unchanged. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone inside a quiet cafe overlooking the Han River. The night before, he had watched the way Min Jae looked at Nala. He had also watched the way Nala's eyes unconsciously searched for Min Jae whenever he entered a room. Daniel smiled to himself. Some love stories don't begin with confession. They begin with years of silent devotion. And some people arrive not to become the ending, but to help two hearts finally find each other. That afternoon, Daniel requested a private meeting with Min Jae. When they met, neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I owe you my gratitude. Min Jae looked confused. For what? For introducing me to someone extraordinary. Min Jae's expression softened. Nala. Daniel nodded. I asked her to consider a future with me. Min Jae's hands instinctively tightened. I know, but I also know something else. He smiled gently. She has never truly belonged to anyone except the man she has quietly loved for years. Daniel chuckled softly. I think she realized it long before either of us. He stood. So let me give you one piece of advice. Min Jae met his eyes. Power teaches men to act quickly in business. He paused. But love teaches us that waiting too long has consequences. With that, Daniel extended his hand. I hope you don't wait any longer. Min Jae shook his hand firmly. For the first time, he understood that Daniel had never been his rival. He had simply been the mirror that forced him to confront his own heart. Several days passed. Nala noticed Min Jae becoming quieter. Sometimes she caught him watching her from across the dining room before quickly looking away. Sometimes he lingered in the kitchen after meals, asking questions that had nothing to do with food. What made you choose cooking? She smiled. Because food speaks when people can't. Another day he asked, were you ever unhappy here? She answered honestly. No. He hesitated. Were you ever lonely? She stopped chopping vegetables, then smiled gently. Sometimes. His heart sank. He wanted to ask why, but somehow, he already knew. The following weekend marked the 7th anniversary of Nala joining the mansion. Every year, she quietly baked a small cake for the staff after dinner. This year, however, something unexpected happened. As evening fell, the butler politely asked everyone to gather in the mansion's garden. Nala looked around in confusion. Soft lanterns hung from the trees. A long dinner table overlooked the river. Fresh flowers decorated every corner. The entire staff stood smiling. What is all this? She whispered. The elderly housekeeper laughed. For once, someone else wanted to cook for you. Nala turned. Walking slowly across the garden was Min Jae. He wasn't wearing one of his expensive business suits. Instead, he wore a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. In his hands, he carried 2 bowls of seaweed soup. Nala's eyes immediately filled with tears. He stopped in front of her. I spent 3 days learning. She laughed through her tears. I can tell. It probably tastes terrible. It probably does. They both laughed. For the first time in years. The distance between them disappeared. He handed her 1 bowl. I finally remembered. She accepted it with trembling hands. I never forgot. He took a slow breath. There are things I've said too late. He looked directly into her eyes. And there are things I've never said at all. The garden became completely silent. Even the staff quietly stepped farther away, giving them privacy. When you first came here, I thought you were simply kind. He smiled. Then I believed you were loyal. His voice became softer. Eventually, I realized you were the reason I looked forward to coming home. A tear rolled down Nala's cheek. But I was too afraid to ask myself why. He stepped 1 pace closer. I thought strength meant carrying every burden alone. He shook his head. You taught me that real strength is allowing someone to stand beside you. Nala could no longer hold back her tears. He reached into his jacket. The staff exchanged excited glances. But instead of a ring, he removed the old friendship bracelet from Busan. I kept this all these years without remembering who gave me hope that day. He gently held out his hand. Nala. His voice trembled for the very first time. If your heart still has room. I've never stopped loving you. Before he could finish another word, Nala closed the distance between them. She wrapped her arms around him, crying openly against his chest. You really are slow. He laughed quietly. I know. I waited 7 years. I'm sorry. I almost gave up. I'm sorry. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. I don't want another apology. What do you want? She smiled through happy tears. I want you to stop treating this place like a mansion. He looked puzzled. She gently placed her hand over his heart. And start treating it like our home. For a moment, Min Jae simply stared at her. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile newspapers photographed. Not the calculated smile used during business negotiations. But the genuine smile of the lonely teenage boy who had once accepted a bowl of warm soup in the rain. Several months later, the mansion felt completely different. Breakfast was no longer eaten in silence. Min Jae often entered the kitchen early, insisting on helping despite making simple mistakes. The staff laughed whenever flowers somehow ended up on his clothes. Nala teased him constantly, reminding him that being a billionaire didn't automatically make him a good cook. He happily accepted every lesson. Daniel remained one of their closest friends. He eventually opened a culinary foundation that provided scholarships for young chefs from underprivileged communities, inspired by Nala's kindness and passion. The 3 often worked together hosting charity dinners, believing that food had the remarkable ability to bring strangers together. As for Min Jae, people still feared his influence in the business world. But those closest to him noticed something remarkable. He laughed more. He smiled more. And every evening, no matter how busy his schedule became, he made sure to return home before dinner. Because someone he loved would always be waiting. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits quietly through ordinary mornings, shared meals, and countless small acts of kindness. Sometimes the greatest love isn't found in grand declarations or expensive gifts. It's found in the person who remembers how you like your tea, waits for you to come home, notices when you're tired, and quietly chooses you every single day without asking for recognition. Status can open doors. Money can build mansions. Power can command respect. But none of them can create the warmth that genuine love brings into a home. In the end, Min Jae finally understood that the greatest treasure he had ever possessed wasn't his wealth, his influence, or his reputation. It was the woman who had loved him long before the world knew his name, and who never stopped believing that beneath the feared mafia boss was still the lonely boy deserving of kindness. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from, and comment your favorite moment below, like this video, and subscribe to @Physial_Threads for more emotional mafia love stories.